Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from SOPHIE called Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides. So I tend to find it interesting what people's threshold for weird is in electronic music. Mostly because I'm fairly certain mine is pretty skewed. Now, most of this I can attribute to when I first started getting into electronic music a couple years back, which found me delving into the critically acclaimed experimental electronica that seriously challenged the art form rather than the foundational artisan, house, techno, and other associated subgenres, which I did find, but a fair bit later. But what this meant is that it set a strange baseline for what I would personally consider challenging electronic music, one that's probably not remotely in common with anybody else. So for an easy example of this, let's talk about SOPHIE, known to work with Charlie XCX and the PC Music Group with these chipper, burbling, gleaming, wiry synths, the lumpy, overblown, and distorted progressions in the bass, and a sensibility somewhere between late 90s bubblegum pop and K-pop for synthesizing some maddeningly catchy music and also being exceptionally weird. I've been aware of SOPHIE going back to at least as far as her 2015 project, Product, but I hadn't been thrown off guard as so many other people were. Yeah, the mixes could feel slapdash and unbalanced, and the frequently pitched up vocals really grated on my nerves, but beyond that, well, she at least had a pop sensibility in comparison with a producer like Arca, but that gave me the impression that this was going to be considered so mind-blowing, so genre-pushing, only with respect to modern electropop. Experimental electronica? Not so much. And yeah, I felt it was a little undercooked lyrically, and I wasn't remotely convinced it was that experimental, but I still enjoyed it for what it was, and as such, I wasn't nearly as surprised when she notched credits on Vince Staples' newest project, Big Fish Theory, or that she'd have a larger release following up the compilation Product waiting in the wings that's getting the bandwagon critical acclaim now. So okay, did SOPHIE manage to live up to all those expectations with Oil of Every Pearl's Uninsides? Okay, here's the thing. The more listens I gave this project, the more I am utterly convinced that SOPHIE's choices and timbre have a place in forward-thinking pop and electronic music. But this album is not the best argument for it, not by a long shot. Part of this feels like SOPHIE might be misunderstanding her strengths on a fundamental level, but the problems unfortunately run into the execution as well. And while there is enough gleaming moments of promise to keep this above being mediocre or a failure, I'm a lot more lukewarm on this than I would like to be. It is good, but it does not rise to greatness, even in comparison with Product. And we might as well get the most distracting issue out of the way first, and really the overwhelming issue on this album, the production, specifically around the mixing and especially around the vocals. Now, keep in mind that when it comes to the synth tones splitting the difference between shrill, wiry howls, the jagged, gleaming spikes, and the waves of semi-rhythmic contortions, I'm generally okay with the off-kilter melodies that are brewed up here, just alien enough to be disorienting in their full force, but layered and catchy enough to slide into your mind, especially when paired with the female vocals from frequent pop collaborator Mozart's sister. It's not as experimental or warped on a compositional level as what Arca did a couple years back, specifically when it comes to more of the rhythms and the time signatures, but considering SOPHIE is going for more of an accessible electro-pop framework, I would be completely okay with that if the vocal production was anything close to consistent. And again, this isn't talking about the mutated, crackling distortion wrapped around SOPHIE's vocals on Ponyboy and Whole New World, which I actually mostly like, but the cleaner vocal pickups sound like they've been selectively fed through a filter, where only a certain subset of frequencies in the most mid to high range are boosted to the volume to emphasize their mechanical, gummy shrillness. And when you pair it with bass boosted to crackling, blown out extremes, and synth tones in a lot of similar frequencies that are just as loud and blaring, you get the clash, but not in a way that emphasizes any deeper sense of progression or contrast. It just kind of interferes with each other in a really blaring way. If you're not paying attention, you probably don't even notice the synth solo on the back half of Infatuation, which really strikes me as a misstep given that it could come out there if the synths were better layered. But a song like Immaterial with the most defined pop structure, the best sample case here, because it could well serve as a solid, glittery, K-pop leaning track with the wiry bounce, but SOPHIE draws out that added treble emphasis within the vocals, so not only do they peak in the mix, they're also also stuck against the more atonal melody and clashing there. And that's before you get any of the richer pseudo-90s R&B vocals that are intended to feel more organic, and they don't really match up with anything in this production. But then again, that is operating on the assumption that this album is even trying for more of that pop structure, where arguably Sophie can get the most of the dynamic swell on songs like It's Okay to Cry, which I'd probably say is the most traditionally strong tune here, especially with its crescendo, or the Disney callbacks within A Whole New World, or even the blunt repetition of Infatuation or Ponyboy. Hell, while I would consider most of the lyrics pretty undercooked as a whole, abstract but focus more on the sublimation of the self into raw, ecstatic waves of emotion, it'll go over really well with the Molly set. I actually did really like Faceshopping for how it juxtaposed ideas of warping one's image with consumerism to later become some veneer of representative reality. You end up growing into it. But even that track feels like more of an off-kilter progressive piece with its out-of-nowhere shifts in the instrumental. Then there's Not Okay and Is It Cold in the Water, both of which are very reminiscent of Arca circa 2015 with their jittery shifts of watery glass without a lot of structure. And then you follow it with Pretending, which might as well be a dark ambient piece with the muffled layers howling in the distance before some of the low-end sputters and some revving groove that really doesn't go anywhere. And again, I'm not really against some of these choices. I'm okay with these sounds, except on the pitched up vocals, but that's different. But it feels like the production is still centered most on the blaring synth pop trebles, which leaves the mid to low end connective tissue to the groove painfully underserved to build any sort of groove beyond that blocky, cracking bass. And that's a big problem in the overall immersion of some of these songs. All the synthesizers and squealing vocals have a lot of tone and a lot of volume, but little foundational body, which means that the wild shifts don't quite have the impact that they could in any sort of groove. A lot of overblown texture, but little actual foundation. And with so much of Sophie's aesthetic trying to emphasize that explosive presence, so being so in your face, you wind up with pop songs that are undercut by some of their own mixing, or experimental pieces that feel compromised but lack the structure in order to elevate some admittedly good ideas. And beyond that, honestly, there's not a lot I can really add, especially when I can point to Sophie's contemporaries or earlier body of work and find stronger songs. And beyond nitpicks like how Ponyboy reminds me more of S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders than anything that she's intending, or how the thematic juxtaposition of Whole New World and Pretending World kind of undercuts the euphoria of some of the other songs on the album, Perfume Genius approached a lot of similar themes with way more nuance and pathos on No Shape last year, but I'm just kind of lukewarm on the album as a whole, which means I'm giving it a solid 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, but only tentative. If you're curious, I recommend checking out the compilation Product first beforehand, but Sophie's kind of an acquired taste regardless. I just wish this came together, was mixed a little bit better overall, so take that as you will. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Sophie diehard fans, the comments are right there. If you want to buy the album, links in the description below. And the poll's all there for y'all to tell me how wrong I am. I've heard people say this is their album of the year. I kind of get it, but I really do think there are other producers who have done this sound a lot better. And I don't really even think this is some of Sophie's best work. It honestly kind of feels rushed, and it could have been a little bit more refined. Beyond that, if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to actually see what's on my schedule and maybe get involved there. If you want to see it, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. And until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.